In an old, quiet house full of memories, an elderly woman slowly begins to fade within herself. What seemed like mere exhaustion was, in truth, a cold plan disguised as care. But an invisible woman in the daily routine of the house saw what no one else did and chose to act. What she exposed shook foundations, set truths free, and reignited life where only silence remained. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, continuing. Some absences don't happen all at once. They arrive in small, imperceptible doses until only fragments of what once existed remain. This is how Mrs. Amelia's days began to fade inside that old house in Bath, with its high stone walls and Georgian windows that had witnessed nearly a century of stories. The imposing structure, built in the 1940s, stood at the top of a tree-lined hill, surrounded by centenarian apple trees and beds of hydrangeas that she herself had planted decades ago. At 83, Mrs. Amelia had always been a woman of remarkable presence, short in stature, but with an energy that filled any room. Her mornings began early, with the radio on in the kitchen, always tuned to the same station that played old songs. She liked to prepare scones while humming along, and the scent would spread throughout the entire house, waking everyone with that irresistible invitation. The kitchen was her kingdom. There she commanded pots, spices, recipes passed down from generation to generation. It was there that she felt most alive, most herself. But something changed. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, that vitality began to dissipate like the steam rising from a forgotten cup of tea. Her clothes started to dance on her increasingly fragile body. Her skin, once rosy and firm, lost the glow of happy mornings. Her steps became slower, her voice softer, her gaze more distant. Mrs. Amelia began to forget small things, where she left her glasses, if she had already taken her morning medicine, the name of the neighbor who greeted her at the gate. Then she started to forget bigger things, entire days, complete conversations, the taste of her own recipes. Her son, Peter, a 48-year-old man successful in the import-export business, believed it was just tiredness, a natural reflection of her age. He traveled a lot for work, spending weeks away, always involved in meetings, contracts, and negotiations that demanded all his attention. When he was home, he saw his mother in passing, between one commitment and another. She seemed quieter, it was true, but he attributed it to the passage of time that marks us all. After all, 83 years is no small feat. His wife, Valerie, always elegant and impeccable, reinforced this idea with sweet words and polished smiles. She claimed to be taking care of her mother-in-law with exemplary dedication. She controlled the medication schedules, prepared the meals, and organized the household routine. In Peter's eyes, Valerie was the perfect daughter-in-law, attentive, patient, devoted. He felt lucky to have a wife so dedicated to the family, especially to his mother, who had always been the center of his life. But what appeared to be care was, in fact, control disguised as affection. Every move Valerie made was calculated. The food served, the medicine delivered, the schedules imposed, all meticulously planned. Every spoonful Mrs. Amelia brought to her mouth was a silent victory for the woman who claimed to protect her, and no one suspected, no one saw, no one questioned. The atmosphere of the house changed completely. The kitchen that once exuded the welcoming scent of fresh scones and coffee now smelled of medicine, of thin, tasteless soup, of the overly sweet perfume Valerie sprayed in the rooms. The heavy curtains were always drawn, keeping the rooms in shadow. The radio Mrs. Amelia loved was turned off and stored in a cupboard because Valerie said the noise disturbed her mother-in-law's rest. The garden plants began to wither from lack of care. The apple tree, which for decades had borne generous fruit, slowly dried up, as if it were dying along with the mistress of the house. The imposed routine was suffocating. Mrs. Amelia, once cheerful and communicative, became a shadow of her former self. She began to spend hours sitting in the living room armchair, staring into space, as if she were in another place, another time. She forgot more and more. Days, names, faces, even the taste of the foods she had so loved. Her autonomy gradually disappeared. The walking stick became a permanent extension of her body. Her short steps echoed through the empty hallways like painful reminders of what had been lost. Valerie controlled everything. She decided what Mrs. Amelia ate, when she ate, what she wore, when she could leave her room. She locked the pantry with a key. She hid the telephone. She isolated the elderly woman from any visitors, claiming she wasn't well enough to receive anyone. The old friends who called were dismissed with ready-made excuses. The neighbors who appeared at the gate were told Mrs. Amelia was resting. Peter, always busy, believed every word his wife said. After all, why would he doubt her? The only real witness to Mrs. Amelia's slow fading was Marlene, the housekeeper. A simple woman of 52, of few words, but with very observant eyes. Marlene had worked there for almost 15 years. She knew Mrs. Amelia from the days when her employer still went up and down the stairs without help, when she sang in the kitchen, when she insisted on personally watering every plant in the garden. Marlene had deep respect and affection for the elderly woman, and precisely because of this, she began to notice that something was deeply wrong. At first it was small details. The orange juice Mrs. Amelia drank every morning had a strange, slightly bitter taste, different from usual. Marlene tasted it once, when Valerie wasn't looking, and grimaced. That wasn't normal. The medicine boxes on the bedside table seemed to have been swapped. Marlene knew Mrs. Amelia's medication routine, but now there were new vials, with labels she had never seen before. The food came back from the room almost untouched. Mrs. Amelia, who had always had a good appetite, could now barely manage half a spoonful of soup. Marlene began to watch Valerie more closely, and the more she watched, the more suspicious she became. Her employer had strange gestures. Whenever she prepared something for her mother-in-law, she made sure to be alone in the kitchen. She would send Marlene to fetch something from the yard or to clean a distant room. And when Marlene returned, Valerie would already be leaving the kitchen with a tray in her hands, always with that perfect smile on her lips. One afternoon, Marlene was washing dishes when she saw Valerie open a specific drawer in the pantry, the one that was always locked. From inside, she took out a small transparent vial with a colorless liquid. Marlene pretended not to be paying attention, but her heart pounded. What was that? Why was it hidden? Valerie quickly put the vial in her apron pocket and left the kitchen without a word. That night, Marlene couldn't sleep. She replayed everything she had seen in recent weeks. Mrs. Amelia's rapid decline, the isolation, the strange medicines, the different taste of the food, and now, that mysterious vial. Something was happening in that house, something terrible, and she was the only one who seemed to notice. But what could she do? Who would believe her? Marlene was just the housekeeper. Valerie was the boss's wife, a society woman, always well-dressed, polite, respected. If Marlene were to make an accusation without proof, she would be fired on the spot. Or worse. She needed something concrete. She needed evidence. And for that, she would have to be very careful. The next morning, Marlene arrived at the house earlier than usual. She wanted to observe the routine from the start of the day. Valerie came downstairs around 7 o'clock, impeccable as always, in a light-colored dress and her hair in an elegant bun. She made coffee, prepared fruit, cut bread. All very normal. But when she went to make Mrs. Amelia's juice, she asked Marlene to go hang laundry on the line out back. Marlene obeyed, but she left the utility room door ajar and spied. She saw Valerie take the blender, put in oranges, water, a little sugar. So far, nothing unusual. But then she stopped, looked around, made sure she was alone, and took that same transparent vial from her pocket. With quick, precise movements, she added a few drops to the juice. Then she stirred it well with a spoon, covered the glass, and took it to Mrs. Amelia's room. Marlene felt the blood run cold in her veins. This was real. It was actually happening. Valerie was putting something in her mother-in-law's food. But what? And why? Over the following days, Marlene intensified her surveillance. She mentally noted every suspicious movement, and she noticed a pattern. Every morning, Valerie would add those drops to the juice. Sometimes, she would also put something in the lunch soup. Always when no one was looking. Always with the meticulous care of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. And Mrs. Amelia. Each Day grew weaker, more confused, more distant. One morning, Marlene entered Mrs. Amelia's room to change the sheets and found the elderly woman collapsed beside the bed, weak, with a lost look in her eyes and the bowl of porridge overturned on the floor. Marlene knelt beside her, helped her sit on the bed and held her cold hands. Mrs. Amelia looked at Marlene with eyes full of tears and whispered in a trembling voice, "Marlene, she tampers with my food. I know she does. I can taste it, but nobody believes me. My son doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm confused, that I'm making things up. But I know, Marlene, I know." Marlene felt a tightness in her chest. She held Mrs. Amelia's face with affection and said firmly, "I believe you. I've seen it, and I will protect you. I promise." Mrs. Amelia squeezed Marlene's hand with what little strength she had left and cried. For the first time in months, she felt heard, believed, less alone. But they both knew this was just the beginning. Proving what was happening would be much more difficult and dangerous. Marlene helped Mrs. Amelia lie down again, covered her carefully, cleaned the floor and left the room with her heart racing. She needed proof. She needed something that would show undeniably what Valerie was doing. And then she had an idea. Her phone. She could record it, hide the device in the kitchen and capture the moments when Valerie tampered with the food. It was risky, very risky. If she were discovered, she would lose her job, maybe worse. But there was no other alternative. Mrs. Amelia was dying slowly, and Marlene was the only one who could save her. In the following days, Marlene began to plan. She observed the schedules, the habits, the routines. She chose the best angle in the kitchen, a discreet corner near the spice rack, where she could film the main counter without being noticed. She tested the phone's position several times when she was alone, making sure the camera would capture everything clearly. On the chosen morning, Marlene arrived at the house with her stomach churning with nerves. She placed the phone in position, disguised behind a tin of flour, with the camera pointed exactly where Valerie prepared Mrs. Amelia's meals. She started the recording and left the kitchen, pretending she was going to clean the upstairs bathroom. Valerie came down a few minutes later. Marlene stood in the hallway, tense, praying silently that everything would work out. She heard the sounds from the kitchen, the whir of the blender, the opening and closing of cupboards, and then silence, a silence that seemed to last an eternity. When Valerie left the kitchen, carrying Mrs. Amelia's breakfast tray, Marlene waited a few more minutes before returning. She picked up the phone with trembling hands and checked the recording. It was all there, perfectly clear. Valerie opening the vial, adding the drops to the juice, stirring, carefully, looking around to make sure no one saw. Every gesture, every second recorded. Marlene felt her legs go weak. She had the proof. She finally had proof of what was happening in that house. But now came the hardest part. What to do with it? Who to show it to? How to protect Mrs. Amelia without putting her own life at risk? She saved the video in 3 different places, emailed it to herself, put her phone away, and went back to work, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But inside she was on fire. She needed to act fast. Mrs. Amelia's time was running out, and Marlene knew that if she didn't do something soon, it would be too late. That night, when everyone had retired to their rooms, Marlene lay awake in the small staff quarters at the back of the house where she slept. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the phone in her hands. She watched the video one more time, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Tomorrow, she would have to make the most important decision of her life. Tell Peter, show him the truth and pray that he would believe. Her and not his wife. Because if he didn't believe her, Mrs. Amelia was lost, and so was Marlene. The sun had not yet fully risen when Marlene woke that morning. She had slept only a few hours, tormented by thoughts that gave her no rest. The video was saved on her phone, password protected, copied in 3 different places. It was the proof she needed, but it was also a sentence. To show it meant confronting Valerie, going against her employer, risking everything she had built in 15 years of work. But not showing it meant watching Mrs. Amelia waste, away until there was nothing left of her. Marlene got up, splashed her face with cold water, looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror, and took a deep breath. Today would be the day. She would talk to Peter. She would show him the video. And then, God's will be done. She put on her uniform, tied back her hair, and left her quarters with her heart pounding in her chest. The house was still quiet. Marlene started preparing breakfast, as she did every morning. She put the water on to boil, set out the bread, cut fruit, laid the table. Her movements were automatic, but her mind was far away, mentally rehearsing what she would say to Peter, how she would start the conversation, how she would show him the video without Valerie being around. Peter came downstairs around 7:30. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his hair beginning to grey at the temples. He had the tired face of someone who sleeps too little and works too much. He greeted Marlene with a nod, poured himself some coffee, and sat at the table with the newspaper open, as was his custom. Marlene felt her hands sweat. That was now. It had to be now before Valerie came down. She approached the table, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, her voice a little shaky, "Mr. Peter, do you have a minute? I need to tell you something important." Peter looked up from the paper, slightly surprised. Marlene never asked to talk. She was a discreet woman who did her work in silence and rarely meddled in family affairs. "Of course, Marlene. What is it?" he asked, folding the newspaper. Marlene glanced towards the stairs, making sure they were alone. She took a deep breath and said, "It's about Mrs. Amelia, sir. I need to show you something, but it has to be now before Mrs. Valerie comes down." The urgency in Marlene's voice made Peter frown. He set the newspaper aside and motioned for her to continue. Marlene took her phone from her pocket, typed in the password with trembling fingers, and opened the video. She approached Peter and held out the device. "You need to see this. Please." Peter took the phone, still confused, and pressed play. The video started. The kitchen, Valerie entering the frame, preparing the juice. And then, that moment. Her looking around, taking the vial from her pocket, adding the drops, stirring carefully. All recorded with chilling clarity. Peter's face changed as he watched. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief gave way to shock. And shock gave way to something deeper, more painful. A mixture of anger, betrayal, and horror took over his features. He watched the video twice, 3 times, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. When he finally looked up at Marlene, his voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible. "What is that she's putting in my mother's juice?" Marlene shook her head. "I don't know, Mr. Peter, but she does it every day, every single day. And Mrs. Amelia is getting worse and worse, weaker, more confused. Yesterday I found her collapsed in her room. She told me Mrs. Valerie tampers with her food. She asked me for help." Peter felt the world collapse on his shoulders. The woman he had been married to for 8 years. The woman who shared his bed, his life, his home. The woman he loved, or thought he loved, was poisoning his mother. The word sounded absurd, even inside his own head. Poisoning. But the video didn't lie. Valerie's gestures, furtive, careful, were those of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and who didn't want to get caught. "How long have you noticed this?" he asked, his voice still trembling. "I started to suspect a few weeks ago, Mr. Peter. Mrs. Amelia got worse very quickly. The juice tasted strange, the medicines seemed different. The food came back untouched, but I only managed to prove it now with this video. I didn't want to believe it, but it's true," Peter completed, running his hands over his face. "My God, it's true." At that moment they heard footsteps upstairs. Valerie was waking up. Peter quickly handed the phone back to Marlene and said in a low voice, "Don't say anything to her. Don't let on that I know. I need to think. I need to see this with my own eyes." Marlene nodded and returned to the kitchen, her heart still racing. Peter picked up the newspaper again, trying to look normal, but his hands were shaking. When Valerie came down a few minutes later, beautiful and put together as always, with a sweet smile on her lips, he felt nauseous. How could she smile like that? How could she act so naturally? "Good morning, love," Valerie said, kissing the top of his head. "Sleep well?" "Morning," Peter replied, forcing his voice to sound normal. "I did." Valerie poured herself some coffee, took a piece of toast, and sat beside him. She started talking about her plans for the day, about a charity event that weekend, about the need to change the living room curtains. Peter listened without really hearing. He watched her every gesture, every expression, trying to see behind that perfect mask. Who was this woman? Did he really know her? After breakfast, Valerie went upstairs to take care of Mrs. Amelia, as she did every morning. Peter waited a few minutes and then went up too, silently. He stood in the hallway near the ajar door of his mother's room, listening. "Good morning, my dear mother-in-law." Valerie's voice sounded melodious, full of false affection. "I've brought your breakfast. You need to eat properly, okay? To get strong." Peter peeked through the crack in the door. He saw Valerie helping his mother sit up in bed, arranging the pillows, setting down the tray. Mrs. Amelia was pale, her eyes sunken, her movements slow. She seemed to have aged 10 years in a few months. How had he not noticed? How had he been so blind? Valerie offered the glass of juice. Mrs. Amelia took it with trembling hands, brought it to her lips, but after one sip she grimaced and put the glass down. "I don't want it. It tastes bad." "There's nothing bad about it, Mrs. Amelia. It's fresh orange juice. You need to drink it. It's good for your health." "I don't want it," Mrs. Amelia repeated, pushing the glass away. Valerie's expression changed. For a fraction of a second, the smile vanished and was replaced by something cold, almost cruel. But it quickly returned to normal. "All right, then at least have the porridge. Shall we?" Peter felt a tightness in his chest. His mother was afraid. He saw it now. He saw the way she shrank in Valerie's presence, how she avoided her gaze, how she refused the food. And he had ignored all these signs, attributing everything to old age, to mental confusion, when in fact his mother was being poisoned, slowly, systematically. He went downstairs on shaky legs, locked himself in his study, and called the family doctor. He scheduled an urgent appointment for Mrs. Amelia. Then he called his lawyer. He needed guidance. He needed to know what to do, how to proceed, how to protect his mother without alerting Valerie. The following days were torture. Peter had to feign normality, act as if nothing had changed, while inside he burned with anger and guilt. Anger at Valerie for what she was doing, guilt for not having noticed sooner. How many times had he defended his wife when his mother complained? How many times had he said Mrs. Amelia was confused, that Valerie was a saint for taking care of her with such dedication? How many times had he been an unwitting accomplice to this crime? He began to observe everything with renewed attention. He saw Valerie locking the pantry with a key. He saw her hiding the landline phone. He saw her sending away visitors who came to see Mrs. Amelia. And the more he saw, the more horrified he became. How had he been so naive? How had he entrusted his mother to a woman like this? Marlene was also tense. She knew Peter was investigating, but she didn't know how far he intended to go, whether he would confront Valerie, whether he would call the police, whether he would truly believe what he had seen. The uncertainty was agonizing. One evening, Peter came home early from work. Valerie was in the living room watching television. He went straight up to his mother's room. Mrs. Amelia was lying down, staring at the ceiling. When she saw her son, her eyes filled with tears. "My son," she whispered, holding out her hand. Peter sat on the edge of the bed, took his mother's fragile hand and felt a lump in his throat. "Mum, I need you to tell me. Everything that's been happening. I will believe you. I promise I will believe you." Mrs. Amelia began to cry. For years she had tried to speak, tried to warn him, but no one listened. Everyone thought it was in her head, the confusion of an old woman. Now finally someone was willing to listen. "She tampers with my food, son. She puts something in it that makes me dizzy, weak, confused. I try not to eat, but she insists. She hovers over me. And when I refuse, she gets angry. I'm afraid of her, son, very afraid." "I know, very." "Mom, I have proof, and I'm going to get you out of this. I'm going to protect you. No one will ever harm you again, I swear." Mrs. Amelia squeezed her son's hand tightly. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was still a way out. Maybe she could still escape this nightmare. In the following days, Peter began to act. He hired a private nurse to stay with his mother during the day. He told Valerie it was to lighten her load, that she was working too hard. Valerie reacted, badly, claiming she didn't need help, that she was managing just fine. But Peter was firm. The nurse would stay. End of story. The presence of another person in the house changed everything. Valerie could no longer tamper with Mrs. Amelia's food freely. The nurse, a young and attentive man named Roger, prepared her meals, administered her medicine, and noted everything in a logbook. And Mrs. Amelia began to improve. The confusion lessened. Her strength slowly returned. The color came back to her face. Valerie realized she was losing control. She tried to convince Peter to dismiss the nurse, but he wouldn't budge. She then tried to get close to Roger, to manipulate him as she had everyone else. But Roger had been instructed by Peter not to accept food or drink from anyone but himself, and not to leave anyone alone with Mrs. Amelia. The tension in the house escalated. Valerie became more nervous, more irritable. She started arguing with Peter over small things. She accused Marlene of being a gossip, of making up stories. But Peter didn't listen. He already knew the truth. He was just gathering more evidence, preparing the ground for the final confrontation. Marlene, for her part, started sleeping with one eye open. She knew Valerie was dangerous, and that dangerous women, when cornered, could do unthinkable things. One night, Valerie appeared at the staff quarters where Marlene slept. She had a cold smile on her lips. "You've been very nosy, Marlene," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You've been talking nonsense to my husband, haven't you? Filling his head with lies about me." Marlene felt fear crawl up her spine, but she kept her voice steady. "I haven't told any lies, Mrs. Valerie. I only showed him the truth." "The truth?" Valerie laughed, a humorless sound. "You don't know anything. And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep quiet. Because people who meddle too much tend to get hurt. And I wouldn't want anything bad to happen to you, Marlene. It would be a shame." The threat was clear. But Marlene didn't let herself be intimidated. She looked Valerie in the eye and replied, "You can threaten me all you want, but I won't leave Mrs. Amelia alone. Not as long as I'm alive." Valerie stared at her for a long moment, her eyes filled with hatred. Then she turned and left, slamming the door. Marlene locked the door from the inside and stayed awake the rest of the night, phone in hand, ready to call for help at the slightest sign of danger. The next day, everything changed. Peter woke up, resolved. He wouldn't give Valerie any more time. He wouldn't risk his mother's life any longer. It was time to act. He called Valerie for a talk in the living room. Marlene and Roger stayed nearby, in case they needed to intervene. Mrs. Amelia was in her room, resting, but aware of what was about to happen. "Valerie, we need to talk," Peter began, his voice firm. "About what?" she asked, sitting on the sofa with an air of someone who had nothing to fear. Peter took Marlene's phone and played the video, turning the screen towards Valerie. "About this." Valerie's face went pale. Her eyes widened. For a moment she was completely still, watching herself add the drops to the juice. When the video ended, she swallowed hard and tried to smile. "Peter, I can explain." "Explain what?" He interrupted her, his voice laden with disappointment and anger. "Explain why you're poisoning my mother. Explain why you're killing her slowly." "What do you have to explain, Valerie?" "I'm not poisoning anyone," she protested, standing up. "This is a misunderstanding. That's just a vitamin supplement that—" "Don't lie anymore," Peter shouted, losing his composure. "Don't you dare lie anymore. I know what you're doing. My mother knows. Marlene knows. Everyone here knows. It's over, Valerie. It's over." Valerie realized there was no escape. Her mask of perfection cracked, then shattered. And what appeared underneath was terrifying. Coldness, calculation, a complete absence of remorse. "You don't understand anything," she said with a disturbing calm. "That old woman was in the way. Always has been. Sucking up your attention, your money, your time. And this house, Peter, this house is worth millions. I deserved my share. I deserved what's mine by right. But no, she was going to live forever, wasn't she? 100 years old, stuck in that bed, spending everything, leaving crumbs for us." Peter couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're talking about inheritance? You're killing my mother for money." "For justice," Valerie corrected, lifting her chin. "For what is owed to me. I married you, I took care of this house, I put up with that old woman for years, I deserved it. And she was going to die anyway, I just sped up the process." The silence that followed was deafening. Marlene was in shock. So was Roger. And Peter felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The woman he had married was a monster. The silence that filled the room was heavy, thick as fog. Peter looked at Valerie as if seeing her for the first time. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. For 8 years, he had lived beside a stranger, a woman capable of smiling while plotting, the slow, cruel destruction of another person. And not just any person. His mother. The woman who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally, who had opened the doors of her own home to welcome them when they married. "Get out of my house," Peter said, his voice low but filled with a firmness that allowed no argument. "Get out now, and never come back." Valerie took a step forward, changing her strategy. Her eyes filled with instant tears, her voice became shaky, pleading. "Peter, love, please, you can't do this. We're married, we're a family. I made a mistake, I know, but it was because I was desperate, confused. I can change, I can get help. Please, don't abandon me like this." But Peter was unmoved. He had seen that performance before. The fake tears, the dramatically broken voice, the studied gestures. It was all a lie, it had always been. "You tried to kill my mother," he said, each word a sentence. "You poisoned her for months. You watched her waste away, suffer, and you continued. And you still have the nerve to ask me to forgive you? You're not a confused person, Valerie, you're a criminal. And you will answer for it." Valerie realized that manipulation wasn't working. Her face changed again. The tears dried instantly. Her expression hardened. "You'll regret this, Peter. A lot. I know important people. I have lawyers. I'll sue you, this house. I'll take half of everything. And no one will believe a senile old woman and a gossiping housekeeper." "I have proof," Peter replied, holding up the phone. "Video, witnesses, and I'm turning it all over to the police. So if I were you, Valerie, I'd think very carefully before threatening me." Valerie looked around. Marlene stood near the kitchen, door arms crossed, her expression serious. Roger stood beside her, equally firm. There were no allies here. There was no one willing to believe another one of her lies. She was alone, cornered, defeated. With a final look of hatred, Valerie went upstairs to get some things. Peter followed her, making sure she wouldn't try anything against his mother. 15 minutes later, Valerie came down with a suitcase in hand, her face hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't over," she said, stopping at the door. "You'll pay for humiliating me like this. All of you will. Pay." "The only person who's going to pay for anything here is you," Peter replied, opening the door. "Now get out, before I change my mind and call the police right now." Valerie left, slamming the door hard. The sound echoed throughout the house. And then, silence. A different silence than before. Lighter, as if the entire house had let out a sigh of relief. Marlene leaned against the wall, her legs shaky. Roger ran a hand through his hair, still processing everything that had happened. And Peter ran up the stairs straight to his mother's room. Mrs. Amelia was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door. When she saw her son enter, she asked in a trembling voice, "Is she gone?" "She's gone, Mum. Gone for good. You're safe now, I promise." Mrs. Amelia began to cry. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of liberation. For months, she had lived in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Everyone thought she was going crazy. Everyone thought it was just old age. But she knew she was being poisoned. She knew she was dying slowly, and nobody believed her. Until now. Peter hugged his mother, feeling the fragility of the body that was once so strong. "Forgive me, Mum. Forgive me for being so blind, for not believing you, for letting this happen." "It wasn't your fault, my son," Mrs. Amelia said, stroking his face. "She was very good at deceiving people. She deceived everyone, even me in the beginning. But the important thing is that it's over. It's over, isn't it? Yes, it's over, and now you're going to get better. You'll get strong again. We'll take good care of you. Me, Marlene, Roger. You won't want for anything." Mrs. Amelia smiled. It was a weak smile, but genuine. The first real smile she had given in many months. In the following days, Peter took all the necessary steps. He took his mother to the doctor, who was shocked to discover what had happened. Tests were run. It was found that Mrs. Amelia had been medicated with excessive doses of sedatives, mixed with other substances that caused mental confusion and physical weakness. The doctor said that if it had continued for a few more weeks, the damage could have been irreversible. Mrs. Amelia had had a narrow escape. Peter also consulted his lawyer. Together, they prepared for a legal separation, and more importantly, they gathered all the evidence to present to the authorities. The video, the statements from Marlene and Roger, the medical reports, the vials found in the room Valerie had occupied, hidden at the back of a wardrobe. Everything was meticulously documented. Meanwhile, Mrs. Amelia began her recovery. With proper nutrition, correct medication, and a lot of love, she improved day by day. The color returned to her face, strength returned to her arms and legs. Her mind, once confused and foggy, began to clear. She started to recognize dates, names, events again. She began to smile, to talk, to make jokes. Marlene cared for her with a dedication that went far beyond professional duty. She prepared her favorite foods, talked for hours, helped with the physical therapy exercises the doctor had recommended. A deep bond formed between the two. Marlene was no longer just the housekeeper. She was the woman who had saved Mrs. Amelia's life. She was family. Roger also became a constant presence in the house, even after Mrs. Amelia no longer needed intensive nursing care. He continued to visit. He brought fruit from the market, helped with small repairs around the house, kept her company. Mrs. Amelia was very fond of him. She said he had a smile that lit up the day. The house began to return to what it once was. The curtains were opened, letting the sun in. The radio started playing again every morning, filling the kitchen with old songs. The smell of freshly baked scones once again spread through the hallways. The garden plants, once withered and neglected, were watered and fertilized. And the apple tree, the one that seemed to have dried up completely, began to show signs of life. Small green buds appeared on its branches. It was as if the tree knew the danger had passed. Peter changed too. He requested a transfer at work so he could spend more time at home. He cancelled unnecessary trips. He started having lunch with his mother every day. He discovered that he had wasted so much time chasing money and deals, while what really mattered was right there, in that house, waiting for him. One afternoon, as they were having tea together in the garden, Mrs. Amelia took her son's hand and said, "You know, my son, I learned something from all this. You never know who really matters until life tests you. I thought it would be my daughter-in-law who would care for me in my old age, but it was Marlene, a simple woman who had no obligation, who risked her own job to save me. That is true love, not the pretty love from movies, full of sweet words, but the love that acts, that protects, that sacrifices." Peter agreed. "You're right, Mum, and I learned too. I learned that blind love can be dangerous, that trusting too much without questioning can cost you dearly. But I also learned that there are still good people in the world, people like Marlene, like Roger, people who do the right thing even when it's hard." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Valerie was trying to rebuild her life. But it wasn't easy. The news of what she had done spread among acquaintances. Old friends avoided her. Doors that had once opened easily were now shut. She tried to hire lawyers to sue Peter, but when she told the story, when she revealed the evidence he had against her, they all refused the case. It was indefensible. Valerie ended up living alone in a small flat, very different from the large house in Bath. Every day she looked out the window and thought about how she had lost everything. The house, the status, the money. And all for what? For greed, for impatience, for believing she could get away with it, for underestimating an old woman she thought was too frail to defend herself and a housekeeper she thought was too submissive to react. One day she received a summons. Peter had filed an official complaint. The authorities wanted to question her. They wanted to hear her side of the story. Valerie thought about running, thought about disappearing, but she knew it would be pointless. The evidence was too solid. The video was irrefutable. There was no escape. On the appointed date, Valerie attended the interview accompanied by a public defender, as she had no money to hire a private lawyer. She sat in a cold room in front of people who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. And there she had to tell everything. She had to admit what she had done. She had to listen to the video being played, the statements being read, the evidence being presented one by one. She tried to downplay it, said they were just vitamins, that she wanted to help her mother-in-law sleep better, that it had all been misinterpreted, but no one believed her. The evidence was too clear. The medical tests showed substances that were not vitamins. The video showed furtive, hidden gestures, and the testimonies of Marlene, Roger, and Mrs. Amelia herself were too consistent to be ignored. When she left, Valerie knew her life would never be the same, that she would have to answer legally for what she did, that the whole world would know who she really was, and for the first time she felt something akin to remorse, not for what she had done to Mrs. Amelia, but for what she had done to herself. She had destroyed her own life for greed, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Back at the house in Bath, life was moving in another direction. Mrs. Amelia was getting stronger every day. She could already go down the stairs by herself, with the help of her stick. She started cooking again, beginning with simple recipes, then moving on to more elaborate dishes. Scones were once again baked every week, and that wonderful smell spread through the house, bringing back good memories, slowly erasing the bad ones. Peter definitively ended the probate process that Valerie had so desired. He told his mother that the house had always been hers, and always would be, that she would live there for as long as she wanted, with all comfort and security. This was more than justice, it was reparation. It was the acknowledgement that he had failed as a son, but that he was now determined to do things differently. Marlene received a significant pay rise, but more than that, she received the recognition she deserved. Peter told her, in front of everyone, that she was the hero of this story, that without her courage, her attention, her determination, Mrs. Amelia would not be there. Marlene cried. She had never been called a hero before. She had always been just the housekeeper, the invisible one, the one who did her job without being noticed. But now she was seen, she was valued, she was loved. One morning when Marlene arrived for work, she found a note on the kitchen table. It was from Mrs. Amelia. It was written in a shaky but firm hand. "The light wins slowly, but it wins. Thank you for being my light, Marlene. I love you like a daughter." Marlene kept that note as if it were a treasure, and from that day on she started leaving notes too. Small messages of affection and encouragement scattered around the house, on the fridge, on the bathroom mirror, on Mrs. Amelia's bedside table, all with the same message: the light wins slowly, but it wins. And it was true, the light was winning, slowly, step by step, day by day. The evil that had settled in that house was being cast out. Love was reclaiming its place. The truth was prevailing. At the gate of the house, Peter had a new sign put up. It read, "A home for new beginnings." People passing by on the street read it without understanding its real meaning. But inside, every corner of that house knew the story. It knew the pain, it knew the struggle, and it knew the victory. Mrs. Amelia began to truly live, again, without fear, without poison running through her veins, with renewed faith, with music filling the rooms, with peace finally restored. She knew she had come very close to losing everything, but she also knew she had been saved, and that life, even at 83, was still worth living. Every afternoon she would sit in the garden under the apple tree that had bloomed again. She would look at the blossoms emerging from the once dry branches and smile. That tree was like her. It had almost died. It had become dry, lifeless, hopeless, but with care, with love, with patience. It had started to grow again. It had come back to life. And everyone there knew a fundamental truth. Sometimes evil disguises itself as affection. It comes with pretty smiles and sweet words. But true love, the kind that liberates, the kind that saves, is the love that acts. It is the love of a housekeeper who risks everything to protect someone she loves. It is the love of a son who opens his eyes in time to save his mother. It is the love that chooses truth, even when a lie would be easier. And the story of that house was living proof that the light, however slow it may be, always wins in the end. 3 months had passed since the day Valerie walked out the door, carrying her suitcase and leaving behind a trail of unraveled lies. The house in Bath had been completely transformed, not just in appearance with the curtains open and the garden blooming, but in the energy that circulated through its rooms. It was as if the very walls were breathing more easily, relieved of an invisible weight that had oppressed everyone for so long. Mrs. Amelia was unrecognizable. The frail, confused woman, who could barely get out of bed, had given way to the vibrant person she had always been. She still used her walking stick, it was true, but more as a precaution than a necessity. Her steps were firm, her voice had regained its characteristic power, and her eyes once again sparkled with that spark of life that had seemed to have gone out. Every morning she would wake up early, even before the sun had fully risen. She would go down to the kitchen, turn on the radio to her favorite station, and start preparing breakfast. The smell of baking scones once again became the hallmark of that house. Neighbors passing by on the street would comment with a smile about the delicious aroma coming from the house at the top of the hill. Marlene would arrive shortly after, always on time, always with a smile on her face. The relationship between the two had evolved into something far beyond employer and employee. They were friends, they were confidants, they were chosen family, the kind that comes not from blood, but from the heart. They talked about everything, about old recipes, about television soaps, about life, about dreams and memories. "You know, Marlene," Mrs. Amelia said one morning while kneading the scone dough, "I keep thinking about how you never know where salvation will come from. I was sure it would be my son who would protect me. And he did protect me, yes. But you were the one who saw it first. You were the one who wasn't afraid to act. You were the one who saved me." Marlene felt her eyes well up, as they always did when Mrs. Amelia spoke like that. "You would have done the same for me, Mrs. Amelia. I know you would. Have." "I would have." Without a second thought. Mrs. Amelia wiped her hands on her apron and hugged Marlene. "You are the daughter my heart gave me, my dear, and I thank God every day for putting you in my life." These moments of affection and gratitude became frequent. Peter also participated whenever he could. He had kept his promise to be more present. He drastically reduced his work trips, delegated more responsibilities to his partners, and prioritized time with his mother. He had lunch with her almost every day. He spent afternoons talking in the garden. He took her for drives around the city on weekends. It was during one of these outings that something unexpected happened. They were walking through the historic center of Bath when they bumped into Valerie. She was leaving a building, probably a solicitor's office. The encounter was so sudden that none of the three had time to avoid it. Valerie froze, her face turning pale at the sight of her ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law. She looked noticeably different, thinner, her face tired, her clothes less elegant than they used to be. All that aura of superiority had vanished. In its place was a woman, visibly defeated by life. "Peter," she said, her voice hoarse. Then she looked at Mrs. Amelia and lowered her eyes. "Mrs. Amelia." Peter tensed, instinctively placing himself between his mother and Valerie, as if he still needed to protect her. But Mrs. Amelia gently touched her son's arm and took a step forward. "Valerie," she said, her voice firm but without anger. "How are you?" The question took Valerie by surprise. She had expected insults, accusations, hatred. But there was only a genuine question asked with a disconcerting serenity. I'm facing the consequences of what I did," Valerie replied, forcing herself to hold her gaze. "The case is ongoing. My solicitor says that things don't look good for me." "And how do you feel about all this?" Mrs. Amelia asked. "Do you have any regrets?" Valerie swallowed hard. This was a question she had avoided asking herself, but here, in front of the woman she had tried to destroy, there was no escaping it. "I regret losing everything, destroying my life, getting caught." "But you don't regret what you did to me," Mrs. Amelia completed, not as a question. Valerie was silent for a long moment. Then, with brutal honesty, she replied, "I don't know. I wanted so badly to get out of that situation, to have what I thought was mine by right. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. But now, seeing you here, alive, strong, I don't know what to think anymore." Peter was about to say something, but Mrs. Amelia raised her hand, asking for silence. "Valerie, I'm not going to say I forgive you, because that would be a lie. What you did to me was horrific. You took months of my life, filled me with poison, made me think I was going mad. But I'm also not going to carry hatred for you, because hatred is as much a poison as what you put in my food, and I've been poisoned enough." Tears began to stream down Valerie's face. They were not manipulative tears like the ones she used to shed. They were real tears, from someone who was finally facing the scale of what she had done. "I hope," Mrs. Amelia continued, "that one day you can feel true remorse, not for losing everything, but for trying to take someone's life, because until you feel that, you will continue to be the same person you were. And then, Valerie, you will never have peace." Without waiting for a reply, Mrs. Amelia took her son's arm, and they continued walking. Valerie stood on the pavement, watching them walk away, the words echoing in her mind. She knew Mrs. Amelia was right, and for the first time she began to question not just the consequences of her actions, but the actions themselves. When they got home, Peter was visibly shaken by the encounter. "Mum, you didn't have to talk to her. You didn't owe her anything." "I didn't speak for her, my son. I spoke for myself, because I needed to say that. I needed to look her in the eye and show her that she didn't manage to destroy me, that I survived, that I won." Peter hugged his mother tightly. "You're the strongest woman I know." "No, my son. I'm just a woman who was lucky enough to be loved by the right people, and that makes all the difference." In the following weeks, life continued its course. Roger, the nurse who had been hired temporarily, became a permanent fixture in the house. Not as a professional, but as a friend. He had grown fond of the family and the family of him. Mrs. Amelia said he was like the grandson she never had. And Roger, who had lost his grandparents at a young age, found in that house the family warmth he had been missing. Peter finally signed the divorce papers. It was a relatively quick process, considering Valerie had no grounds to contest much. She was facing criminal charges for attempted aggravated murder, and any competent solicitor would advise her not to cause more trouble. The settlement was simple. She would receive nothing from the inheritance or the division of assets, and in return, Peter would not seek compensation for the damages caused to his mother. When it was all finalized, Peter felt truly free, free from the marriage that had been a sham, free from the woman who had betrayed his trust in the worst possible way, free to rebuild his life. One evening during a family dinner, which now included Marlene, Roger, and occasionally some friendly neighbors, Mrs. Amelia made an announcement. "I've made a decision," she said, tapping her spoon against her glass to get everyone's attention. "This house is too big for you, me alone, and too full of memories, good and bad. So I've decided I'm going to turn it into something bigger." Everyone looked on curiously, waiting for her to continue. "I'm going to open a day center for the elderly, not a care home, but a place where people my age can come during the day to talk, do activities and receive affection. Many elderly people are lonely, abandoned, as I almost was, and if I can help, why not?" The silence that followed was one of surprise, but it soon gave way to smiles and applause. It was a brilliant idea, and so typical of Mrs. Amelia to transform her pain into something that could help others. "I'll help," Marlene said immediately, "with whatever you need." "Me too," Roger added. "I can handle the health side of things, do checkups, that sort of thing." "And I'll finance everything," Peter said, his eyes shining with pride. "Equipment, renovations, whatever is necessary. Mum, this is wonderful." And so, the house that had almost been the scene of a tragedy was transformed into a beacon of hope. The renovations began. Part of the house was adapted to receive groups. The large living room was turned into a common area. The garden gained more benches, a small community vegetable patch, and space for outdoor activities. The kitchen was expanded to prepare meals for more people. 3 months later, the centre was inaugurated. The name chosen by Mrs. Amelia was the Lighthouse, a reference to the notes Marlene used to leave around the house. On the opening day, more than 30 elderly people attended. Some were brought by family. Others came alone, with that look of someone searching for something long lost. Companionship, purpose, dignity. Mrs. Amelia greeted each one with a warm hug. Marlene and Roger organized the activities. Peter circulated among everyone, talking, listening to stories, and the house, which had been so quiet and dark during the months of suffering, was now filled with life, laughter, conversation, and music. An 85-year-old gentleman, Mr. Oswald, arrived leaning on 2 sticks brought by his daughter. He was visibly disheartened, downcast, as if he no longer expected anything from life. But when he entered that house, when he smelled the scones, when he heard the radio playing old songs, when Mrs. Amelia greeted him with a genuine smile, something in his eyes changed. "This place feels like my mother's house," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "It's been so long since I felt like this. At home." "Then this is your home now," Mrs. Amelia replied, holding his hand. "You are welcome whenever you like." Scenes like this were repeated throughout the day. Elderly people who arrived suspicious, lonely, sad, and who gradually opened up, smiling, talking. And when they left, they took with them something they had lost: hope. In the evening, when everyone had gone, the family gathered in the garden. They were exhausted, but happy. Mrs. Amelia looked around, at her son, at Marlene, at Roger, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. "You know," she said, "I almost died. I almost lost everything. But look what has been born from that pain. Look how many lives we'll be able to touch, how many elderly people we'll be able to help. Sometimes I think I had to go through all that to get here." "No, Mum," Peter said firmly. "You didn't have to go through that. Nobody deserves to. But you chose to transform that terrible experience into something beautiful. And that makes all the difference." Marlene stood up and handed each of them a small card. On it was written, "The light wins slowly, but it wins." "This is so we never forget," she said. "Never forget that even in the darkest moments, the light is there, waiting, growing, and one day it wins." Everyone kept the card with care. It was more than a phrase. It was a reminder, a testament, a promise. In the following months, the lighthouse became a landmark in the region. Elderly people came from neighboring towns to participate in the activities. Some came every day, others just once a week, but everyone took with them a bit of that warmth, that welcome, that sense of belonging the house offered. Mrs. Amelia was fully fulfilled. She woke up every day with a purpose. She cooked for dozens of people. She talked, advised, hugged. She was a grandmother to many, a mother to others, a friend to all. And with every smile she received, every sincere thank you, she knew it had been worth it. Everything had been worth it. Peter had also found a new purpose. Besides financing the lighthouse, he became involved in other causes related to elder protection. He gave talks about the signs of abuse, about the importance of being vigilant, about how a loved one might be suffering in silence. He told his story without shame, without hiding the mistakes he made by being blind for so long. And many people, upon hearing him, recognized situations in their own families and took action to protect their loved ones. Marlene was promoted to coordinator of the lighthouse. She managed the activities, the volunteers, the logistics, but more than that, she was the heart of the place. She was the one who remembered every person's birthday. She was the one who noticed when someone was sad and needed a chat. She was the one who left notes of affection scattered around the house, bringing smiles to everyone. Roger took over the health side. He monitored the elderly with chronic conditions, organized talks on preventive care, and taught age-appropriate exercises. And in his spare time, he helped in the garden, where the apple tree now bore abundant fruit that was turned into delicious jams. And Valerie? Valerie was serving her sentence in a semi-open regime. The trial had been swift. Considering she had confessed and the evidence was irrefutable, she was convicted of attempted aggravated murder, with a reduced sentence for cooperating with the justice system. During the day, she worked at a charity, ironically caring for the elderly. At night, she returned to a halfway house where she shared a room with other women in similar situations. The forced work with the elderly was, in fact, the best thing that could have happened to her. Daily, she saw people in the same situation as Mrs. Amelia. She saw the fragility, the dependence, the blind trust in those who were supposed to care for them. And for the first time she began to understand the magnitude of what she had done. She began to feel not just remorse for what she had lost, but genuine guilt for the suffering she had caused. One day she wrote a letter. She addressed it to Mrs. Amelia, but expected no reply. In the letter she apologized. Not the empty apologies she had given before, but a sincere plea, coming from someone who had finally understood the weight of her actions. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, that she didn't deserve it. But she needed Mrs. Amelia to know that she had changed, that she was trying to be a better person, that every day she cared for the elderly with the respect and affection she should have given her. Mrs. Amelia received the letter and read it several times. She showed it to Peter, to Marlene, to Roger. They talked about what to do, and in the end Mrs. Amelia decided to reply, not with words of forgiveness, because that was not yet possible, but with words of hope. She wrote that she believed in the human capacity for change, that she hoped Valerie had truly found a better path, and that maybe one day, when the wounds had healed on both sides, they could talk again. The letter was sent, and Valerie, upon receiving it, cried. They were not tears of self-pity, but of gratitude. Gratitude for receiving a reply when she deserved none. Gratitude that Mrs. Amelia had survived. Gratitude for the chance to perhaps one day make peace with what she had done. Back at the lighthouse, life continued vibrantly. The apple tree that had almost died was now laden with fruit. The neighborhood children, grandchildren of the elderly who frequented the center, loved to pick the apples and eat them straight from the tree. And Mrs. Amelia always said the same thing. This tree is just like us. Sometimes it seems like it's going to die, that there's no hope. But with love, with care, with patience, it comes back to life, and it bears fruit sweeter than ever before. At the gate of the house, the sign, "A home for new beginnings," remained, and now everyone who passed by understood its meaning. It was a place where lives were rebuilt, where the elderly found purpose, where family was defined not by blood but by love, where the light had conquered the darkness slowly but definitively. And everyone there, every person who had been touched by that story, knew a fundamental truth. Sometimes evil disguises itself as affection, comes with pretty smiles and sweet words. But true love, the kind that liberates, the kind that saves, is the love that acts. It is the love that protects. It is the love that sacrifices. It is the love of a courageous housekeeper, of a son who opens his eyes in time, of an elderly woman who transforms pain into hope. And the light, always the light, wins in the end. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Mrs. Amelia, Peter, Marlene, and all who were part of this journey has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by Marlene's courage, by Mrs. Amelia's transformation, by the redemption possible even in the darkest situations, please leave a like on this episode. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the intense stories we bring you every day. Stories that reveal the deepest, truest, and most emotional side of the human soul. And tell us in the comments what struck you most in this story. Was it Marlene's courage, Mrs. Amelia's strength, the transformation of the lighthouse? We really want to know what you felt. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions. Until then, and always remember, the light wins slowly, but it wins.